Greetings everyone. It's a big honor for me to be present here in Finland for the first time and again address the Finnish audience in person. So I'm very grateful to Turku for the invitation. What he's doing and what he has achieved so far deserves a huge respect and all kinds of support, political support at all levels. Indeed, after this New Zealand Terror Act, the global political system tries to put a ban even on obviously moderate identitarian organizations, Austrian in particular, in order to conceal its own guilt for what has happened. And we see that it is quite probable that the connection between successful identitarian organizations and the rise of so-called right populism in the world is what really worries them the most. As a result, Orwellian police laws have been implemented on Facebook and were suggested for the internet in general. And again, we understand that they are aimed not so much against some radical underground far-right groups, but they are aimed against public nationalists, sort positionists, who receive quite a positive feedback from a society. In the context of the Awakening Conference, indeed, what was the main point of concern for the Finnish and Western media was so-called possible radicalization of Finnish nationalist circles by the Azov movement, as a movement which has a military wing, which has quite developed structures, and is getting ready for the parliamentary election in autumn, which will be our first parliamentary election. Well, indeed, as of now, the Azov movement is quite developed. It consists of several elements. First of all, military wing, the Azov regiment, which is the official unit of the National Guard of Ukraine, which is subordinate to the Ministry of the Interior, and as such, I can proudly say that it is considered one of the most exemplary units of the Ukrainian military in general. Also, we have the parliamentary wing, the Party of National Corps, which was established in 2016. It has over 10,000 members in its ranks, branches all over Ukraine. And in spite of the fact that parliamentary election in autumn will be our first election, yes, it already heavily affects Ukrainian politics. Also, we have the renowned national militia structure, NGO, which is often mentioned by the Western media. It's a structure securing law and order in Ukrainian streets. In fact, it's a prototype of the Ukrainian territorial defense. And it was also established last year, and this structure is, in spite of being described by many as a paramilitary organization, it is, at present, it performs officially the function of observers during the ongoing presidential election in Ukraine. So, as you see, it is not an extremist organization. It is accepted in Ukrainian society by the Ministry of the Interior in particular. And again, it is often addressed by different Ukrainian citizens when they need help, for instance, during the illegal construction. And last but not least, we have over 30 different social projects, also functioning as independent NGOs, from the Youth Corps, a system of teenage patriotic youth camps, and Sport Corps, system of different gyms, training programs, which are suggested for the audience, Ukrainian citizens, for free, mostly, and to military school, which again is open for participants, for members from all Ukrainian units, military units, and Metapolitical Plumbing Club, which hosts various education initiatives. These social projects, they help us to implement our pro-party program and attract new people into our movement, as well as help us build the state within the state. Also, as International Secretary of National Corps, also run the international department of the party, I coordinate the activities of Intermarium support group. This is our geopolitical project, geopolitical program. This group was established by our leader, Andriy Beletsky, in 2016. He's a member of parliament, also deputy head of the Committee on National Security and Defense of the Parliament of Ukraine, the founder and the first commander of the Azov regiment, and the leader of National Corps Party. So, as far as you see, in spite of the far-right reputation of the Azov regiment, which hails from the early history of the Azov battalion, when it was yet a battalion, which accepted in its ranks almost everyone who were capable of taking up arms to defend our homeland, including ultras with so-called far-right tattoos, yes. These photos have been recycling for 5 years already in different autistic Western and Russian media alike. In spite of this reputation, the other regiment again is an exemplary unit of the National Guard of Ukraine, and the other movement in general, I would say, has one of the most developed international programs aimed at neutralization of potential inter-ethnic conflicts of different chauvinistic sentiments, as well as aimed at development of the alternative world order, in fact, which would be based on healthier communication between different cultural and civilizational types. So, returning to the point of concern of different media, Western media, well, indeed, the freedom of speech is our principal stance, and I will keep standing side by side with the vanguard of Finnish national consciousness. But I came to Finland with another quite definite program, again, which is centered around the idea of the regional union, geopolitical union of Intermarium or Adriatic-Baltic Black Sea Union. Luckily, this idea not only has not been banned, but even gains momentum in the countries of Central and Eastern Europe. And that is why we should not let various dependent Western media, as well as illiterate hate groups like Antifa, drive us into the corner of reactive self-defense instead of putting forward our own constructive agenda, like the suggested Intermarium cooperation, which I believe could be quite interesting to the Finnish audience, especially given that Finnish patriotic movement has also its own history of development of the Baltic Black Sea Union. We also add the Adriatic angle due to important cooperation with these countries, especially Croatia. It is quite obvious that given the historical parallels between Ukrainian patriotic movement and Finnish generations who have been fighting for national liberation and participating in Russo-Finnish wars, it would be quite natural to restore this regional cooperation between new Finnish and Ukrainian nationalist movements. And it is quite natural also because it is possible to defend the cause of the freedom of speech, which the problem which concerns all of us as a whole, only if we join forces, only if we establish new forms of information, political, geopolitical cooperation, and again change the situation on a supranational level, which if we transcend our own concerns and will give this solitary response to these threats. For example, our cooperation with Latvian National Alliance Coalition Party, in particular within the framework of the New Nationalism platform, it started in a response to a very dangerous synthesis of Kremlin's hybrid warfare against the region's country, warfare which portrays our countries as failed states, and the no less dangerous sentiments coming from the West, which undermine our national identities and national unity, and again bring our region, our national potential to collapse. So it was our response to join forces and counter it as a whole. And today it is also very important to realize that current political developments are very similar to what has happened in the 20th century, when our countries were literally torn apart and divided between the superpowers. So today it's important to realize that only restoration of the classic European geopolitical third way between East and West, the development of the regional consciousness, which could serve as a platform for the restoration of the all-European or simply European superpower, instead of taking sides with this or that superpower and becoming a part of their grand projects to develop our own grand project. Only it can make a difference. Only it can change the situation as a whole, because there is only one way to defeat this unhealthy global world order. It is to develop the alternative universalism, so to speak, from the right, our own version of the world order. This is, in my opinion, this is the only version, the only way to change the situation, instead of retreating into some reactionary, old-dated formats like nation states and isolating ourselves in some right-wing ghettos. We have to expand. We have to explain the society our views and we have to address the international community as a whole, because it is the only way to preserve our ethnocultural identities in this modern global world. And of course, we understand that situations of Ukrainian society, Ukrainian nationalist movement and Finnish nationalist movement are quite different. It is true that the main advantage of the Ukrainian nationalist movement, in spite of the huge challenge to Ukrainian statehood, it is the very conflict in the East which keeps empowering Ukrainian nationalists and volunteers as the vanguard of Ukrainian national resistance to the Kremlin's aggression. As I told you already, the Azov regiment is valued by the Ukrainian society, sacrifice of its many volunteers. It is valued as a unit with which reconquered many eastern Ukrainian cities from the Russian invaders. So it is for our, both for our authorities and for rivals and hostile forces from abroad, it is the basis for the political capital of Ukrainian nationalists, I mean their frontline activities, and it is again true. In this respect, our situation also resembles the situation of German Freikorps movement, volunteer movement, after the First World War, because these volunteers, they also fought against the Bolshevik threat both inside Germany and in the Baltic states, and also considered their own Weimar government treacherous government, the government which has led to the defeat in the First World War. Our situation is very similar. We have to withstand the hybrid Russian aggression in the east of Ukraine, and at the same time we have to be active in politics. We have to strive to power ourselves, because our current government is devoid of geopolitical subjectivity. It is indeed to a great extent a puppet government which does not solve Ukrainian problems and is also a threat to our statehood. So the only option for us is to strive to power ourselves. And again, we understand that we can change something only on a global scale. Only if we start with alternative regional integration, proceed to alternative European integration, and then launch some transcontinental projects. Why not? Everything is interconnected in a modern state, and it is impossible to, again, to change the situation in a separate country, in a separate nation state. But in spite of the difference of our positions, I think that the references to national history are still quite acceptable and welcome in a Finnish society, and in my opinion it would be quite helpful to maintain and to cherish this continuity between the national liberation struggle of the Finnish patriotic movement in the 20th century with current patriotic activities of modern Finnish nationalist and identitarian organizations, as it happens in Ukraine and helps a lot our cause. Also, we see today that the rivalry between superpowers, Western and Eastern, are to a great extent revived. But at the same time, we should not overestimate this rivalry. In spite of tensions, economical cooperation between the European Union and Russia goes on. Peace Minsk agreements, which were suggested by the West, by the European Union and the United States to Ukraine, are extremely harmful to our statehood. So we cannot say that it's a real opposition. Instead of choosing and taking sides with this or that pole, again, we have to develop our own grand project. And in this respect, Intermarium Union, which we suggest, it serves a double purpose. First of all, it helps to counter Kremlin's hybrid warfare. Second, it also helps to counter dangerous economical, demographical, you understand what I mean, and economical policies of the European Union. We have to create a union, starting with partnership, which would serve our own national interests. And I can also add that many Western European countries, movements, parties, organizations are also interested in what this Intermarium Union can bring to them, even American colleagues. So this idea is still has a future, the same as it has a quite bright past in the Finnish-Ukrainian case in particular. These historical Finnish-Ukrainian connections have been closely monitored by Ukrainian society since the outbreak of the conflict in the east of Ukraine. And first of all, such well-known Finnish nationalist patriotic figures as Herman Gumerus, In the 20th century, he was a Finnish ambassador to Ukrainian hetmanate, Ukrainian state. Of course, Karl Mannerheim, at that time, Prime Minister of Finland, and Foreign Minister Rudolf Holsti. They were all of them have been cooperating with Ukraine and were interested in the establishment of the Baltic Black Sea Union. Already in 1916, the private apartment of Hermann Hummerus in Switzerland it served as a headquarters for the League of Russia's former foreign peoples, including Finns and Ukrainians, and it was established with the German help and was coordinated from Berlin. So as we see, Hummerus, he was quite active in the international field as a diplomat, and he was trying to use German help to strengthen the statehoods of the region. And in 1917, this year, the year of the Bolshevik Revolution, it was very turbulent for Ukraine. After the collapse of the Russian Empire, was established the the Central Council, which proclaimed Ukrainian People's Republic. And as we guess, quite expectedly, soon enough, Bolsheviks proclaimed their own Ukrainian People's Republic, only of the Soviets, and in turn proclaimed the original Ukrainian People's Republic an enemy of the people. And already in December of 1917 began the Bolshevik war on Ukraine, and soon enough they also captured Kiev, the capital of Ukraine modern, but it was reconquered with the German help in exchange for food supplies to the West. But due to disagreements between German powers and Central Council, soon enough was established another Ukrainian government with German help, Ukrainian Hetmanate. It was the restored classic form of Ukrainian Cossack statehood, and it was headed by the last Ukrainian hetman, Pavlo Skoropadsky, who was an official ally of German Paul von Hindenburg. And as soon as this hetmanate was established in 1918, this government received recognition first by Germany and Austria, and then by some regional countries, including Finland. Finland was one of the most eager countries to recognize a newly created Ukrainian independent state. And Finnish embassy was created in the center of Kiev, and Hummerus was appointed an ambassador of Finland to Ukraine in July of 1918. The respective document was provided to our foreign ministry by the archives of Finnish foreign ministry. So it's quite interesting document of our international cooperation. But again, I will talk a bit about history. Soon enough, due to the rise of socialist popular moods, as well as due to unpopular attempt of Pavlo Skoropadsky to create a federation with White Russia. At that time it was already a non-existent political entity. Also due to Germany's defeat in the First World War, soon enough a hetmanate as well collapsed, and Ukrainian People's Republic was restored under the rule of Simon Petlura. I will mention several more important developments in the region at this period of time. In 1919, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Finland, Ukraine and Poland also tried to discuss the Baltic Black Sea Union. It received the support of Mannerheim and Holsti, and again Hummerus was sending letters to the Finnish Foreign Ministry in which he said that Finns should not abandon the Ukrainian patriotic movement, and he said that even us, we hardly escaped the Bolshevik yoke, although our social order was stronger, the same as patriotic sentiments in our society. And he also wrote that Ukraine is a big and rich country, and if it gets independent from Russia, it will happen to weaken Russia, and it will again simplify, facilitate the cause of Finnish national independence. But Ukrainian People's Republic government, headed by Petlura, it was itself patriotic, but at the same time socialist, so they tried to come to terms with Bolsheviks, and you know that such negotiations never end well, so Kiev was soon enough again captured by Bolsheviks. And, but important point of regional cooperation was the common military campaign of Simon Petlura, Ukrainian forces, and Polish forces led by Polish Marshal Joseph Pilsudski. This campaign was officially entitled "For Our Freedom and Yours," It happened in 1920 and it was successful. So joint Polish-Ukrainian troops liberated Kiev from Bolsheviks. But unfortunately, soon enough, in 1921, Poland, in order to defend its own statehood from the advancing Red forces, had to sign a peace treaty in Riga, which put an end to the independence of Ukrainian People's Republic, and Ukraine was divided in half between Soviet Union and Poland. And we know that it also did not end well for Poland, because almost 2 decades later, Poland itself was divided between the Third Reich and Soviet Union. So it was quite an important lesson for the region, which I think still has to be learned. Now we do not face direct military aggression, I mean your part of the region, as opposed to Ukraine, but different kinds of powers, soft or hard powers, keep splitting us and keep weakening us. So in order to stop being a kind of puppets, marionettes of superpowers, we have to think about becoming a superpower ourselves. It can look like an impossible task, but in my opinion, namely such impossible tasks are the most realistic. If we start with some lower points of cooperation, we will never reach the level at which it could be suggested to the entire society. And if we start with global projects, we can offer them to academic community, to different diplomatic structures, as well as to political parties. And then we can descend to the lowest level, so to speak, and we can create, after all, common spaces, supranational, international spaces of freedom of speech, in particular of political speech. So this lesson can be revived today to our benefit. In a recent interview for Sarastus, which is also a very important link for the cooperation between Finnish and Ukrainian nationalist movements of the new generation, I also explained a bit about the models of regional integration which were suggested in the former century. Apart from the Finnish one, which I briefly discussed today, there were 3 main conceptions. There was Ukrainian doctrine, developed by our geopolitician and ideologist of nationalism, Yuri Lipa. It was called Black Sea Doctrine. He was also assassinated by the NKVD agent, which was a common fate for the majority of Ukrainian leaders of nationalist movement in the former century. There was a doctrine which was suggested by aforementioned Józef Pilsudski. There was also a conception of Latvian General Pēteris Radziņš. He also served for a long time first in the army headquarters of Ukrainian hetman Pavlo Skoropadsky, then in the army headquarters of Ukrainian People's Republic. So he was both Latvian and Ukrainian patriot, and it's a very important figure linking like our region. Pēteris Radziņš also suggested the model of Baltic Black Sea cooperation. And these 3 versions are quite important precedents which can be revived today. But again, our version of Intermarium is new, and we consider Intermarium in a pan-European context as a platform for possible alternative all-European integration. It is interesting that Lipa, he emphasized countries from the Black Sea region, and also was interested in this ancient trade route from the Varangians, Scandinavia, to the Greeks. He considered Belarus a kind of shield for Ukraine and believed Poland to be a part of the Baltic region. But Pēteris Radziņš, he included in his version of Baltic Black Sea Union all countries of the former Russian Empire. So it was Baltic countries, Ukraine, Poland and Finland. And just like Lipa, Radziņš believed that the key role in the future of the region belongs to Ukraine, not to Poland. But both Pilsudski and Lipa, they also complemented their versions of Intermarium with the idea of the creation of independent nation-states in the territory of Russian Federation. In Pilsudski's case, it was called Prometheism. Pilsudski, he didn't include Intermarium Finland, but along with Lipa, he included Romania. And as compared to both of them, Pilsudski expanded this Baltic Black Sea Union with the Adriatic angle. He included Central Powers, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia, these countries. And today, this format, it has been revived by the Polish President Andrzej Duda in his inaugural speech in 2015, he had suggested to revive the Adriatic-Baltic Black Sea Partnership, and this idea, soon enough, it was supported also by the Croatian President Kolinta Grabar-Kitarović, who established the Adriatic-Baltic Black Sea Group, comprised of 12 EU member states. Soon enough, in 2016, at the Dubrovnik Forum, they transformed this group into the Three Seas Initiative. I think you heard about it. And in 2017, the American President Donald Trump, he supported the Three Seas Initiative, not only as a kind of economical union. At that time, French President Emmanuel Macron, he called to impose sanctions on Poland for its refusal to accept this migrant quota distribution plan. And Trump, he supported Poland, and he said that Poland currently defends the values of the Western civilization, as well as he promised broad financial support to the Three Seas Initiative in exchange for American liquid gas. And so it was both financial and political support which made this project alive. Currently, of course, along with the Visegrad Four, the Three Seas Initiative is nothing else but the autonomy within the European Union. It's not, of course, an independent structure, and officially it aims at deeper integration into the European Union. But these countries, they keep criticizing the European Union for cultural policies, demographic policies, its immigration policies, and for unfair economical model center-periphery. It is obvious that we will be able to create some alternative military and political bloc only if a full-scale war begins, for instance, with Russia. Otherwise, at the moment, we advocate realistic step-by-step strategy, and in this respect, we suggest the model of Nordic Council as a kind of international, interparliamentary body which coordinates cooperation of countries which are members of different military and political blocs. For instance, Iceland and Norway are members of NATO, not members of the European Union. Sweden and Finland members of the EU, not members of NATO, and then Denmark is member of both EU and NATO. In our case, most regional countries, Baltic countries, Poland, Romania are members of both EU and NATO. Ukraine is non-aligned, and Belarus at the moment is a Russian puppet who struggles really hard not to become a union country of the Russian Federation. In exchange for, yes, it was a price for Russian gas pressure, because the Belarusian economy is dependent on Russian Gazprom, I would say 70%. So, and this country did not engage in war with Russia. It was always very friendly, but still it didn't help. So, but using Nordic Council as a model, we can also cooperate and then proceed to the autonomy within the European Union. And if crisis tendencies in European Union and NATO aggravate, and we already see such tendencies, in this case we will be able to establish our own sovereign and military and political bloc. Because it is not so unrealistic again. A bright example, not so long ago we talked to our Latvian colleagues. Apart from the Latvian National Alliance, there is a society of Peteris Radziņš, aforementioned general. We visited each other's events in Ukraine and Latvia, in embassies of Ukraine, in Kyiv and in Riga. So he said that 10 years ago, these colleagues, they said that 10 years ago it was impossible in Latvia to have any doubts about the omnipotence of NATO. It's like the sun shining in the sky. But after the developments in Ukraine, when part of the territory was invaded and Crimea was annexed, many Latvians, they don't believe that if similar scenario happens in Latvia, that the West will come to defend them. For instance, many Latvian cities, they already have a Russian majority in some towns, in some cities. And they believe that if similar scenario as in Donbass happens in Latvia, then the West can again say, oh, it's undeclared war, it's a hybrid warfare, so it's not a war, and they will refuse to defend even the NATO member state. That's why they're interested now in the cooperation with Ukraine, because we have, as of now, quite a vast military experience. We lack some structures, but experience, yes, we have already more than enough. And we know that there is a Litpol Ukrbrig, Lithuanian, Ukrainian, Polish brigade. Recently there was also established a Division North, Danish, Estonian, Latvian brigade. So some defense structures already exist, but they are subordinate to the West, to the EU, to NATO, to United Nations, and by their own will they cannot take part even in peacemaking operations. So in this respect we understand the big difference between our own sovereign structures, political and military, and structures which are subordinate to some other superpowers. But again, it's quite useful for the exchange of experience and for creation of our common space, both defense space and information space, which can serve our own cause of the freedom of speech in particular. So this is how we see this model of integration, and I also brought some materials. You can see how we suggest this step-by-step integration, like starting with countries which, like Ukraine, Poland, Belarus, and then we proceed to the south of the region. Romania, Croatia, other countries join, and finally you can see Finland, and of course it extends to the entire Scandinavia. Again, we also have Western European extension of our geopolitical program, so we are not going to isolate in this sphere. We are also going to cooperate with political forces from the Western European countries. The way Intermarium support group sees this possible cooperation is as follows. First, we initiate cooperation between different NGOs, political organizations which sympathize with this geopolitical idea. Then we proceed to the alliance between political parties which share the political corps. For instance, Ukrainian National Corps, Estonian EKRE. Recently they included in their party program the provision about the strategical course to develop Intermarium apart from Euro-Atlantic integration. So it's also their own understanding of the need to practice this multi-vector geopolitics. And you know that also recently they gained almost 20 seats in Estonian parliament, which is a huge success. And next step will be to initiate inter-parliamentary cooperation, as Nordic Council does. And final step would be to create a confederation of sovereign nations, which would function both as a defense alliance, as an economical union, and as a cultural union. We will be able to exercise common foreign policy and, of course, common cultural policies, which are based on very similar understanding of ethno-cultural identities and a similar understanding of threats to the latter. So this is our model, and as of now we have already held 3 conferences of the Intermarium support group. Inaugural conference was held in 2016. It was also attended by military attaché of Lithuania, Hungary, Romania, Poland, and various delegates from the region, from Baltic Black Sea region, also from Croatia, and even from Russia. There was organization from Kaliningrad. They discussed possible cooperation of Kaliningrad with the future Intermarium Union. But as you guessed, their future fate was not very bright. Soon enough, they also issued a petition to rename Kaliningrad to Königsberg. And they were, of course, imprisoned and accused of separatism. So now, unfortunately, these people are held in prison. And we hope that they will be released. Also, next Intermarium conference was also attended by representatives of defense structures from Poland, from Baltic countries, and we are also going to attend the Security Forum in Poland on April 11th, in a week. We were invited there by the program Academic Legion, which is launched by the Polish Ministry of National Defense. It should also be attended by the commander of Litpol Ukrbrig, but currently we have problems with President Petro Poroshenko. I think he won't be re-elected. Currently another candidate is far ahead of him, but before the first round of presidential election, National Corps started all Ukrainian rallies against Petro Poroshenko because we found out about stolen millions of money from the military budget of the country of Ukraine, and we were disrupting each single meeting of Poroshenko with voters across Ukraine, asking him questions through the megaphone. Petro Poroshenko, where are money? Why the corrupt officials backed by you are not in prison? So his rates went down quite fast, but he was also very eager to take revenge on us, and he put the pressure on the Ukrainian consul in Poland, in Lublin, and this consul in turn started threatening the University of Maria Skłodowska-Curie, which was going to host us. and he started threatening other participants of the conference and promised to complicate the further exchange of student programs, further activities of student exchange programs between Ukraine and Poland. So, in order not to create problems for the organizers, we withdrew from the conference, and Polish participants who invited us also boycott the event now. So, it is, first of all, a lesson which shows that Petro Poroshenko doesn't care about national interests of Ukraine, about strengthening our regional defense cooperation. He cares only about his political ambitions, but at the same time we see that it will only strengthen again our regional ties, and of course we will plan further international events. This third international conference of Intermarium support group, it was also attended by Croatian military. You know that Croats, they have their own experience of fighting for independence in the 90s. War for independence, so they understand us quite well. They draw some parallels between ex-Yugoslavian scenario and Ukrainian long-time fight for independence. So, third Intermarium conference, it was attended by Brigadier General of Croatian Armed Forces in retirement, and he also promised to help us to establish Ukrainian Foreign Legion. It's also a provision in the party program of National Corps, and he himself spent in the French Foreign Legion almost 20 years, so he knows what he's talking about. And this is our plan. So you see that we will have this defense cooperation with Poland, with Croatia, with the Baltic states. Also we initiate common historical projects, historical memory, which of course extends in the future. And the next Intermarium conference, as of now, it is scheduled in Zagreb. We will see if it will be held there, because at present there are quite interesting developments in Croatia. Several nationalist parties created an alliance, a bloc, and they are going to host this event, also with support of another Croatian general, who is also an MP, Željko Glasnović. Of course, we will also invite, well known to you probably, Tomislav Sumnić, Croatian American new right author. This bloc of the parties will be the organizers of this event, and some of them are also members of the European Parliament, so they even suggest to hold next Intermarium conference in Brussels. So you see, you are scared by the extremists from the Azov battalion, some white supremacists, but these scary stories, they exist only in the autistic sphere of mainstream Western media or some Russian media, whereas in reality our cooperation goes on and reaches some official levels. So that's why I also suggest you to join this program and to think how it is possible to cooperate with the Intermarium support group as an independent NGO, in fact. So it is open both for political parties, for identitarian organizations like SIOM and CISU and others, and I believe that it will definitely help us restore this space of political freedom for our movements. For, after all, while the East and West are very busy fighting each other, rivaling each other, we will be able to restore our own geopolitical sovereignty. For in the former century, the situation again was very similar. We know that there was first Russian Empire, then Bolshevik Russia, and there was the Entente, Western powers, and Germany. Germany lost the First World War, and the Entente, the West, modern West, it also did not have a solidary position about the future of the region. The West tried to keep our region just as a buffer zone, as a cordon sanitaire, which was protecting Western world from the Bolshevik invasion. But they were not interested in our sovereignty, of course. So they provided help, but very limited, and they simply chose between Poland and Ukraine as the last bastion protecting Western civilization from the possible Bolshevik invasion. In the end, Poland was chosen as such fortress due to rapidly changing Ukrainian governments, which I briefly described above. But again, this fortress did not last long, and soon enough West sacrificed Poland, which was divided between Germany and Soviet Union. So today many believe that Ukrainian nationalists are like pawns on this Zbigniew Brzezinski's grand chessboard, that we are just useful fools who are used by Western imperialism against Russia, which is the hope for the West. But the truth is that European Union and NATO themselves refused to accept Ukraine as a member state, and not only now, but they said that it won't happen in 20 years. Ukraine is quite a big country, even without Crimea. It has over 40 million population, and European Union already experienced problems with other Eastern European member states. So of course they don't want another member state, especially with the war going on in the country. We have non-equivalent economies, so definitely they lack money even for this. Also, it is obvious that European Union suffers from its own crisis tendencies, Brexit, terror, refugee crisis, also possible economical decline in some countries. So they are not interested in making Ukraine the part of this new European family of nations. The same goes for NATO. NATO openly clashes with Russia only in Syria and avoids direct confrontation with Russia by any means. So Ukraine is not invited in NATO. We left to our own means, but me and our movement view it as a unique historical chance to restore the geopolitical sovereignty, subjectivity, first of our region, then of entire Europe, and then it will be possible, of course, to start shaping this alternative world order. You remember that at some point Donald Trump even said that it is possible for America to withdraw from NATO. He has his own reasons, economical for that, but it means that these international structures are not everlasting and not omnipotent, and we have to think about our own projects, our own grand projects. In this respect, these developments are very similar in Ukraine and in Japan. Japan is, apart from Ukraine, the only country which has territorial claims to Russia. In our case, it's Crimea. In Japanese case, these are southern territories, a part of Kuril Islands, which also were annexed by Russia after the Second World War. And the Japanese, they demand from the Russian Federation to return these territories to Japan. Also, we know that after recent tensions with North Korea, the United States did not want to get involved in it. And again, Japan was left to its own means. And now we know that there is patriotic revival in the Japanese society, which was heavily pacified after the Second World War, and now they even talk about the rearmament of Japan and even about the restoration of nuclear powers. It's also another point which makes these situations in Ukraine and Japan similar, because although we have never suffered this heavy pacification as Japan, because in the Second World War we were fighting against the German invasion, so we did not have to undergo this pacification, but still in 1994, it was not an initiative of Russia, but rather of the West. Again, another example that the West is not interested in our defense capabilities. In 1994, under the Budapest Memorandum, Ukraine renounced its third largest in the world nuclear potential in exchange for so-called security assurances. Security guarantees on territorial integrity, political sovereignty, and what else? Like independence of Ukraine. And this Budapest Memorandum, it was signed by United Kingdom, by United States, and by the Russian Federation. Later joined other nuclear countries, China and France. And one of the signatory countries, Russian Federation, invaded Ukraine and annexed Crimea. So this we can see very well the real value of modern international agreements and international law in particular. It is non-existent, but many of you knew it before when America started its intrusion in the Middle East. So and the fruits of these activities we now see in European countries. So that is why our society, not only nationalists, different categories of Ukrainian citizens are very open to the idea of the rearmament of Ukraine, modernization of Ukrainian army, and that is why, again, the Azov regiment is valued in our case, because in spite of this terrible reputation in Western media, it was the first unit which adopted NATO standards, Western military standards, to simplify our cooperation with regional states and make it serve Ukrainian national identity and national interests. We had Georgian instructors who helped to establish military school, and you know that in 28th, Georgia has become this first country which suffered from the hybrid Kremlin's warfare. there were also established puppet republics, and at that time the West also refused to accept Georgia as a NATO member state. So the West does not want to engage in open warfare with Russia. So that is why we have this quite a high level now, and our regional partners are interested in cooperation with Azov Regiment. And if we talk about what Americans themselves think about it, in fact, they were interested in it, but there are obvious pro-Kremlin lobbies in the American society. In particular, maybe you heard about a senator from California of Hindu origin. His name is Ro Khanna. He sent a letter to the State Department of the US in which he expressed his concern about the rise of xenophobic far-right sentiments in Poland and Ukraine. And in particular, he talked about Ukrainian extremist far-right Azov battalion or militia. It is quite a common practice to call Azov regiment militia. It is not militia, again, it's an official unit of the National Guard of Ukraine. So, as a result of similar lobbyist activities, it is forbidden to provide all kinds of assistance from America to this particular unit, to the Azov regiment, due to for ideological reasons. But we don't care much about it because anyway, Western military assistance to Ukraine is very limited. Both in military respect, only Lithuania sent some cartridges, so we had some Javelin systems, but again, we don't know even how to repair them. If some element breaks down, we won't be able to replace it. So it's all leftist pro-Kremlin lobbyists monitor these developments very well, and they're afraid of America's getting involved in this military conflict. So this military assistance, we don't have it in fact, and again, maybe we don't need it because it is the only way for us to finally wake up, if we talk about awakening, and restore our own superpower, our own geopolitical sovereignty and subjectivity. But what it is interesting that when this letter was published in the media, there was also an official response from the press service of the Ministry of the Interior, and they said that the Azov regiment is an exemplary unit of the National Guard of Ukraine. It has a glorious history. It reconquered the city of Mariupol, and this is the second biggest city in Donetsk region after occupied Donetsk itself. So they said there is no option that it will ever be disbanded. And again, we see that this extremist reputation is just a fiction which exists only in the media and is being perpetuated by some lobbyist groups. So this idea of Ukraine's rearmament is it's quite popular in Ukraine, and in this respect, it can also become a starting point for the rearmament of the region in general, and for the restoration of the all-European security system, which is non-existent now. Terror acts can happen on a regular basis in Western European countries, and it should not last long. Such a state of affairs is simply outrageous. Conflict in the east of Ukraine is only one side of this collapse of the European security system, which we should restore. And also, we of course have our own ecological projects, but still under such conditions, we support the idea of the restoration of Ukraine's nuclear status, and in this respect, it could also form a kind of nuclear shield of the region and other countries within the reach of this shield. The point of this observation is that military conflict is again a tragedy. Many people who are far away from Ukraine, from Russia, they're very worried about these developments. They consider it a clash of European white peoples and so on and so forth. Well, I can say that first of all, during all such conflicts, of course, some ultra-nationalist, so to speak, and chauvinistic sentiments exist, but in our case, we do not view it as an ethnic conflict. There are many Russians in our movement. Many Russians fled to Ukraine after the beginning of war and were fighting in the rank of the Azov battalion, the Azov regiment. The first foreign volunteer of the Azov battalion was Russian. So it's not an ethnic war, it's a war with Putin's regime. And of course, we also understand that there is a global political system which is in many respects no less dangerous for Ukraine than Russian military hybrid warfare. And the system, this globalized world order, it is advocated both by the Western elites and by the modern Russian elites. in brief, you know that there are also quite strong migration tendencies in Russia from non-Russian parts of Russian Federation and from neighboring Russian countries. They are appreciated at the official level, as opposed to Ukraine. Russia signed the global UN Migration Pact, and they underlined that migration plays a very positive role in Russian economy and so on and so forth. And there is also very strict anti-extremist so-called legislation. So all attempts to incite like inter-ethnic, inter-racial, inter-religious hatred are heavily persecuted, and there is also the biggest Muslim minority in Russia, in Europe, as well as the biggest mosque in Moscow, which was opened with the participation of Chechen President Ramzan Kadyrov and Turkish President Erdogan. So the political freedom there is almost non-existent, just like in Western countries, and not a single nationalist organization in Russia as of now exists. The last one was banned in 2015. Most Russians fled to Ukraine who were engaged in this kind of activities, and now only some, even Eurasianists like Alexander Dugin, they also quite pessimistic now. If you watch the latest Dugin's updates on his YouTube channel, Expertise of Dugin, he admits that in spite of Russian foreign political triumph in Syria and in Ukraine, I mean annexation of Crimea, the situation in Russia itself is very complicated. He said that it is impossible to do politics there for conservatives, that the best Russians can do now to preserve their ethno-cultural identity in the history is to develop some narrative for the future. So now there are no political conditions for their work. Whereas when so-called Russian Spring began, all of them were very enthusiastic and they believed that it will start a political revolution in Russia and all over the world. So Dugin says we have to support Putin on the international scene against West, but he openly admits that in Russia itself the situation is very complicated. So again, this is like just two poles of this global world order, and we should not search for some master or even a partner, and we should not become this part of this alternative big projects which are not initiated by us, but by ourselves. So it is something which is the matter of third geopolitical way, which was also developed above all in Germany, in interwar Germany, and as I showed during my presentation, had many analogs in many countries of our region. So these intuitions are quite similar, and first of all, they are underlined by the idea of restoring traditional European north-south axis against this dangerous split between East and West, which again turns us into the puppets of some superpowers. And speaking about possible political strategies, my speech will soon come to an end. In the case of our movement, National Corps movement or Azov movement, it started with the idea from military to politics and geopolitics. So at first there was just a partisan movement of so-called little black men. It was our response to Russian little green men, soldiers without insignia who annexed Crimea and who monitored, observed democratic referendum. Of course, it was very democratic, we know. So it was our response to this situation. We created this Black Corps, which was comprised of volunteers from eastern Ukraine who lost their houses, lost their homes. So they came to Kiev, regrouped, and then returned to east to reconquer the cities from Kremlin's invaders. So in our case, we never use words like civil war in Ukraine, we never use even words like separatists, because it is quite obvious for us that there were not so many locals who were willing to support actively this project of Novorussia, and there was a group of professional military Russian instructors who just coordinated the locals and brought weapons there. And many members of our movement from Lugansk and Donetsk, which is currently occupied, they also said that they could tell the difference between some local idiots who wanted to receive weapons and be important and cool, and supervisors from Russia. And now many Russians, they admit that those Russians who return from Donbass to Russia, they either get instantly sent to Syria, or they get imprisoned for ridiculous reasons. For instance, robbery. So Russian government doesn't need passionate people who have military experience and who have some political capital and their own vision of the future of the Russian society. They don't need it. and there were only few like nationalist battalions on that side. One of them, Rusich, it withdrew its forces from Donbass a long time ago. They said that they don't understand what they're fighting for. And some other smaller groups, they were imprisoned not so long ago when they returned to Russia for these ridiculous reasons. So, instead you can find there many separatists, some leftists from Spain, Italy, from Texas even, and maybe you also know this Latvian funny national Bolshevik, Benes Ajo, Afro-American or mixed Black Lenin, so-called. So it's very, very funny bunch of individuals there. And of course, Soviet mythology. What I think is quite threatening to all of us. You understand this very well, that even there are some obvious positive trends due to natural conservative mentality of Russians in Russia. Current Russian collective identity is completely based on this neo-Soviet mythology, on the mythology of Russia's victory in the Second World War, Great Patriotic War. So it is also forbidden to revise the outcomes of the Second World War. Historical revisionism is forbidden in general, and the so-called glorification of collaborationists with the Third Reich. In this respect, Russia officially calls Ukraine a neo-Nazi country, but in our case, the struggle of Ukrainian insurgent army, it is officially recognized at the government level. It was one of the achievements of revolution. In 2015, veterans of Ukrainian insurgent army were equalized with veterans of the Red Army. Insurgent army, Ukrainian, for the short period of time it collaborated, it supported Germany, collaborated with Third Reich, so to speak, but soon enough its leader Stepan Bandera was imprisoned in Munich concentration camp because he demanded, of course, independent Ukraine. And Germany was not ready to provide it to Ukraine. So he was imprisoned. It was the end of collaboration. So for us, anyway, it was a patriotic movement, national movement, which started for national liberation of Ukraine. And but at the same time, it heavily enrages not only Russians, but of course also many lobbyist procurement groups in American society. And in the aforementioned letter to State Department by the senator, it was also mentioned as a very outrageous fact, how it is possible for collaborationists with Third Reich to be glorified at the state level. But in Ukrainian society, it's not a problem at all. Again, just like in many Baltic countries, in Latvia, for instance, these people are considered freedom fighters. That's it. And this legacy was revived during the revolution because this army, Ukrainian insurgent army, it also fought against NKVD, against Soviets, as late as till 1955. And this army, it was established by OUN, Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, in the 20th century, which also serves as a basis for the Ukrainian nationalist movement of a new generation. It had very developed structures, hierarchy, different branches, international activities as well. So, but today our movement, it is quite pan-European. So we learn these historical lessons, and we understand that we can achieve our goals only at the supranational level, so to speak. And for many of you, this conflict again can sound something far away, but we also suffer from exactly the same problems which you face today. The decrease of political speech, taking down our public platforms. So in reality, we have over 10,000 members in party only. But on Facebook, you can barely find our pages because they are taken down either by Poroshenko or by some global elites. So definitely we're in the same boat. And this idea is still very, very relevant because just like our government needs volunteer battalions to defend Ukraine from the east, the West also tries to use Eastern Europe as a kind of buffer zone against Kremlin. But while they need us and at the same time are afraid of giving us too much power, we can and we should use this time to strengthen ourselves and to restore our geopolitical sovereignty. And I invite you to join our international geopolitical program of the Intermarium, and as a platform for the alternative European integration, as well as I invite you to develop different metapolitical initiatives. I mentioned the Plumbing Club, Flame Club, which is in charge of various education initiatives. I really also appreciate very much the activities of different identitarian groups and individual video bloggers who are present also today at this conference, because again, they address the audience without the mediation of various political structures, and they also receive a very positive feedback by their subscribers. They are doing a very important work. So even if you have now problems with political freedom, you still can launch different metapolitical initiatives, and I'm very glad to see Kiosk Publishing House here at the venue. And I can tell you that the reason why these identitarian groups like Austrian one is banned there is because of this direct communication with citizens who show their sympathies towards our political and probably also geopolitical agenda. So it's something which should be definitely continued, and I look forward to discussion of the definite plans of cooperation after the conference at this conference venue. So thank you again for the invitation, and hopefully it was not the last time in Finland. See you maybe in Ukraine. Thank you.